My name is Al Roberts. I'm a professor of public policy and director of the School of Public Policy at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the United States. And it's my pleasure to speak to the International Conference on Contemporary Issues in Business Management and Economics. And I'd like to start by extending my congratulations to the Department of Management Studies at the Panapat Institute of Engineering and Technology, and also to the Institute for Engineering Research and Publication for their success in organizing this conference. And I hope that you have had a productive session so far and will continue to do so. I'm going to start a PowerPoint presentation in just a moment, and I'll tell you a bit about what I plan to talk about for the next 30 minutes or so. Well, let me back up for just a moment and tell you a bit more. As I said, I'm the director of the School of Public Policy at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and I'll just tell you a bit about my university and my school. University of Massachusetts has several campuses. We are at the main campus in Western Massachusetts in the United States. It's a beautiful campus and also a very substantial campus with a large number of students, wide variety of resources, and I am director of the School of Public Policy, which was established in 2015 and is now a well-regarded school of public policy in the Northeastern United States. We were very pleased recently to be ranked by U.S. News and World Report as the second place graduate program in public affairs in the state of Massachusetts, in the top 5 in New England. In Massachusetts, we are just behind the Harvard Kennedy School, which is a private institution. So we are the top public university graduate program in public affairs in Massachusetts. We offer a 1-year master's degree in public policy and a 2-year master's degree in public policy and administration. And you can learn more about our programs if you're interested at the website at the bottom of this screen. I should say as well that the PowerPoint presentation itself is available on my website, and I'll show you the address for the website in just a moment. So that's a word about the UMass Amherst. Let me just tell you a bit about myself. I have been teaching in public affairs and public policy for about 30 years. I'm originally from Canada. I've written several books and many articles on public policy. If you're interested in the work that I have done, you can go to my website, and the address is here, www.aroberts.us. You can also find me, incidentally, on Twitter or LinkedIn. And if you would like the slides for today's presentation, you can go to this web address, aroberts.us, and you'll be able to find the slides. They're downloadable from that website. I've also had the privilege of visiting India many times over the last 20 years. I work closely with many academic and professional colleagues in India, and I look forward to visiting India sometime at the soonest possible opportunity. And I also want to express my thoughts and solidarity with the people of India as they go through a very difficult time at the moment. So let me tell you a bit about what I would like to do today. As I mentioned, I'm a director of a school of public policy and also a professor of public policy. And I know that many people who are participating in the conference today may not be in that field, may not be familiar with it. Public policy is a relatively well-established field here in North America, but newer, I think, in India, although in recent years there have been several programs, postgraduate diploma programs, being established in the realm of public policy, and also some schools dedicated to public policy. So what I thought I would do today is cover 3 points. First, just telling you a bit more about what the field of public policy is about and why it's important. Briefly touching on some of the major public policy challenges that we need to think about in the coming years, and also flagging 2 or 3 reasons why crafting public policy is a especially challenging but also a very exciting task for scholars and practitioners. So let me start just by talking a bit about what the field of public policy analysis is. And here I think I would make a couple of points. I won't take these in the order in which you see them on the screen. This is a field that emerged as a distinct scholarly field in the United States and a few other countries in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. So it's roughly about 50 years old. It's a scholarly field. It is very close to some other fields, notably political science and economics, but it is also a distinct field. It's got its own courses, schools, degrees that specialize in public policy, professors that specialize in public policy. The degrees go in many different by many different names, although they're very often closely connected. Some schools offer master's degrees in public policy. Some offer MPAs or master's degrees in public administration. Some offer higher degrees in PhDs in public policy or public administration as well. And you'll find many departments and schools that specialize either in public policy or public administration. This is also a professional field. It's a field of professional practice. The people who take degrees in schools like mine go and work in government. They also work in non-governmental organizations or contractors that do a lot of business with government. And they may even work in private sector firms that are regulated by government and also have extensive interaction with government. Many of our individuals also go into social advocacy work in which they are engaged in mobilizing the public in campaigns to improve public policy in one area or another. So you will find many practitioners of public policy working in government agencies, working for elected officials, working in advocacy groups and businesses. In many large government departments, you may find offices that are dedicated to public policy or public policy analysis or program evaluation, all of which are connected fields. I do want to emphasize, however, that the field of public policy is different than other scholarly fields. For example, and I'm here thinking of the comparison, especially with political science or economics. It's distinctive because it is action-oriented and prescriptive. Now, what do I mean by that? We study policy problems with the intention of coming up with policy solutions. That is, remedies for observed problems. So the way in which we approach our studies is always with the question, what should we do about it? There are other fields that are aimed at description, at explanation, that want to understand why the world works the way it does. And certainly in public policy, you need to have an understanding of why the world works the way it does. But our aim ultimately is to produce policy solutions that seem sound and evidence-based that will make the world a better place. So that's one respect in which our field is distinguished from other scholarly fields. It's action-oriented and prescriptive. I think I would also draw a distinction between the work that we do in the field of public policy and the work that is done by many people who are engaged in social advocacy or social mobilization. These are people who are campaigning for governments, for example, to adopt specific policies. And there is a bit of a tension here, but Ultimately, scholars and practitioners in the field of public policy do aim to be dispassionate. We aim to do evidence-based analysis. That is, we try to go where the facts take us. And I think we also are always influenced by a recognition that there is always a sort of certain element of uncertainty about what we are recommending. We offer our best judgment about what the right thing to do is, but we're also open-minded and willing to recognize that new evidence may require us to change our mind. So we aim to be dispassionate, we aim to be facts-based or evidence-based, and we aim to be prescriptive. We aim to give sound advice on how to make the world a better place. And that, in a nutshell, is what the field of public policy analysis is about. I can say a word briefly about what the craft of policy analysis looks like, and I've given you here this sort of standard model of what we do when we undertake public policy analysis. There are many books that outline the basic steps. The first is defining exactly what the problem is. The second is defining the so-called policy options. That is the different ways we might hypothetically address a public policy problem. We next proceed to defining the criteria or standards that we will use to judge different policy options or the policy alternatives. We then try systematically to evaluate each of the policy options according to each of our criteria. And then we engage in a difficult problem of choice, which very often involves trade-offs between criteria. That is, trade-offs between things we care about. And also making a decision under a substantial amount of uncertainty. But that is the sort of, those are the basic steps or stages in the model and in the process of public policy analysis. I do think I want to emphasize that public policy analysis may seem rather dry, but I think of it as a radical project. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it's radical in the following ways. It rejects certain other ways of thinking about public policy. For example, you could say, well, government should do something because government or society has always done things that way. And at some points in history, that has been a reasonable way to talk about the role of government. Its job is to carry on tradition. Well, public policy analysis rejects the notion that tradition alone is a good reason for carrying on a particular policy. So it's a radical project in that sense. It questions tradition. We also question authority. That is, we don't choose particular paths or policy options simply because someone in charge has told us that that is the right thing to do. We are skeptical about what authority tells us. We look at the facts and we formulate our own opinion. So in that sense, policy analysis is a radical project. And similarly, we don't simply follow peer pressure. The fact that every other government in the world is doing something does not necessarily mean it's the right thing for India to do. The fact that some international organization has suggested that some line of policy is the right thing to do is not by itself a good enough argument about why an Indian government should adopt a certain policy. So in this sense, again, policy analysis is a radical project. We think for ourselves, looking at the evidence. I just want to give you very briefly, and I won't go into this chart in detail. Again, you can find the slides on my website, which is aroberts.us. But this is a slide that I have used in my policy analysis class. And it's helpful because it indicates the many different ways in which you can think about public policy, the different criteria that you might want to use when you're trying to decide whether one policy is better than another. And I will go quickly around the clock. At the top, I've got this element, efficiency risk. Well, here we think like economists, and we ask ourselves, what kind of policy is going to make the most efficient use of social resources while fixing a policy problem? And that is a very common way of thinking about public policy analysis, and perhaps the dominant way, but I want to emphasize it's not the only way. If I move to the right, you'll see a circle here called risk of injustice. We also think like ethicists. We ask ourselves, what's the morally right thing to do? Because every public policy involves imposing costs on some people, imposing benefits on another. We have to think about what the fair distribution of costs and benefits is. There are other ethical questions we'd want to think about too. So when we're doing public policy analysis, we think like ethicists and also like economists. And moving around the circle, we also think like politicians. We want to ask ourselves, what are the odds that powerful political actors will actually adopt one policy rather than another? Because we don't want to recommend a policy that is clearly infeasible from the point of view of the political realities. Moving around the circle, we also want to think about implementation risk. And that is the danger that we adopt a policy that absolutely fails at the point of implementation because the bureaucracy doesn't have the capacity as it presently stands to execute the policy competently. So here we are thinking about what is sometimes called state capacity. Does the bureaucracy have the ability to do what we would like it to do? And if they don't presently have that ability, can we build the capacity? Can we hire or create new organizations to do the kinds of work we want to do? This is an immense challenge with many aspects of Indian public policy. It's not just a matter of having the right idea, it's the question of whether the central and state and local bureaucracies are capable of executing the policy we choose. And then finally, I've got a circle here called litigation risk. And what do I mean by that? Well, India, like the United States, like my home country of Canada, is a country that respects the rule of law. Governments are supposed to only do what they are authorized to do by law. There are laws that regulate also how governments go about doing their work. And we want to make sure that the policies that we are adopting comply with legal requirements. And it's never entirely clear which policy is most likely to comply with legal requirements. We may end up going before a court. So when we're crafting public policy, we also want to think about the possibility that we may be challenged in court on the legality of one option rather than another. So the point I would want to make here is that it's a complex, highly complex task deciding exactly what sort of policy is the best one in particular circumstances. And then I've made a point right in the center here that the final thing we worry about is decision making, that is giving advice to policymakers, the people in charge at the top of government, about how they should think about all of these different kinds of risks, how they should make trade-offs between one criteria rather than another, how they should move forward under conditions of substantial uncertainty. So you can see this is a complex, dynamic, challenging process, and it's a very exciting area. And also, for points I'll make in a moment, critically important to get it right. So this, I've just published a book with Cornell University Press in which I observe that we are entering a dangerous century. And what do I mean by that? I mean that countries like India and the United States are facing a wide range of immense challenges. This is a time of turbulence and change, and that makes the job of crafting sound public policy tremendously important. And what sorts of challenges are we facing? Well, we're facing demographic challenges, the movement of large numbers of people to the cities. Very soon, India will become a country in which most people live in cities, and the job of providing infrastructure, for example, is going to be tremendously important. The job of helping a young population like the Indian population that wants education and the other things needed to create a good life, dealing with migration and so on. As you know, in India, there are immense challenges in the realm of economic policy, building a national unified economy that works efficiently but also fairly for every Indian. There are immense questions about how we think about technological changes, what we will do when automation affects our workplaces, or what we do when new information technologies change the character of our politics, for example. Countries like India and the United States are going to be dealing with geopolitical changes like the rise of China, which will change our calculations about trade and security and other matters of international relations. And of course, we're going to be dealing with immense challenges associated with climatic change, changing weather patterns, increased frequency of extreme weather events, and this will challenge governments as well. And then finally, we want to build societies that respect social justice. That is to say, we want societies in which governments are good at dealing with all of these other problems, but also good at treating every individual with respect and assuring them of equality before the law. So broadly speaking, this is the range of issues that public policy analysis look at. You can see it's an immense range. All of these problems are complex. They're pressing. They're incredibly important if we care about the welfare of the public. They are interconnected. It's very hard to talk about one problem without ending up talking about another problem. And they are also potentially dangerous. There's a historian named Jeffrey Parker who talks about fatal synergies. And he means by this that all of these problems, if they happen at the same time, can interact with one another and intensify one another. So we want to be very careful about managing all of these problems carefully and well, because if they get out of hand at the same time, the results can be quite devastating. So that is briefly the substantive terrain that scholars in public policy look at, this range of policy challenges. And as I've said, it's important to get it right. I want to flag, finally, a couple of reasons why getting things done, that is formulating sound public policy, is especially challenging in countries like the United States or India. And the first thing I want to flag is, I've got here the problems of federalism and liberalization. I think probably I should not have used the word problems. Let's call it challenges of federalism and liberalization. What do I mean by this? India is a federal system, as you know. The United States is a federal system. It has a central government, many state governments and union territories, and an immense number of local governments. I've given you here the data for India, but I could tell a similar story about the United States as well. So, getting public policy done, formulating public policy, and implementing public policy is more challenging because we have all of these players involved in deciding what to do and executing the policy. So that's one dimension of complexity. Another dimension is the fact that the United States and India, especially since the early 1990s, has put more emphasis on the role of the market. That is, more emphasis on the role of businesses in providing essential services or performing essential functions. Very often they are businesses that are regulated by government. So very often government has to depend on business to work as a partner in executing some kind of policy. Sometimes it's the cooperation of the private sector is obtained through regulations. Sometimes it's through contracting or other modes. But this is another element of complexity. more players involved in the policy process. I want to show you a chart that is derived from an American report produced by a company called Deloitte Research. And this was prepared for an American audience, but of course it would work with an Indian audience as well. And the premise of the report is that we live in the era of networked governance. And what does that mean? It means that in just about every realm, getting policy formulated and executed properly is a process that involves multiple players at many different levels of government, players in the private sector and in government as well, very often also nonprofit organizations, and very often we also rely on the cooperation of citizens, members of the public. They need to do the right thing in order for public policy to work. The pandemic has provided an illustration of the importance of citizen involvement, citizen engagement of public policy. Think about all of the ways in which our efforts to stop the spread of COVID-19 depend on the active cooperation of citizens in wearing masks, social distancing, obtaining vaccinations, and so on. So indeed, you could use the pandemic as an illustration of the importance of getting networked governance right. So that is one thing that we think about a lot in the field of public policy, this question of networked governance. I'll tell you one other thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and that is what I will call the democratic challenge. India is the world's largest democracy, as you know, a thing about which it should be very proud. The United States is also a democracy. And I'm sure that you, like me, are deeply committed to the idea that India should remain a democracy, a system of government in which every individual has the opportunity to participate in government and to decide who will run their country. So we're committed to the democratic principle. Having said that, we are confronted with the challenge of showing that democracies can serve people well. Now, I've got here a couple of quotes from a 1999 book by Amartya Sen. The book is called Development as Freedom. And in this book, written 20-some years ago, Amartya Sen makes observations about why democracy is a good system of government. He observes, for example, and the choice here, by the way, is between democracy and between authoritarian systems, non-democratic systems like China. And writing 20 years ago, Amartya Sen said, well, democracies aren't at a disadvantage in terms of economic growth. This is the quote at the very top. He doesn't think having an authoritarian system means that you're going to grow more quickly. And Amartya Sen also said in this book a quote that became very famous. He made the observation that no famine had ever happened in a functioning democracy, that basically democracies stopped famines from happening because democratic governments were responsive to the needs of the people, unlike authoritarian systems. And he didn't just say that about famines, he said that about other disasters too. He said democracies are better at stopping famines and other such disasters. And he also suggested democracies could be pretty good at economic growth. Now, here are a couple of realities I think we need to sort of look at squarely. Here is a chart about economic growth in India and China over the last 30 years. What we're looking at here is income per capita, GDP per capita in China, and we want to look at the blue line for China, nominal GDP per capita in China, and I believe the similar line we want to look at is the brown bottom line for India, nominal GDP per capita for India. And you will observe that back in 1995 or so, the two countries were just about the same. GDP per capita in India and China was roughly the same. Now, this is just a little before Amartya Sen was writing his book. So he was writing his book probably around 1996, 1997. It was published in 1999. And at that time, the gap between India and China was pretty small. The gap is much larger today. Not a GDP per capita is 5 times higher in China than it is in India today. And that's a gap that's emerged just over the span of about 20 years. And we want to think critically about that and ask, how do we match China in terms of economic performance while also retaining our commitment to democratic principles? And then if I look at the response to the coronavirus, you can see that here in the United States, a democracy, we've had a terrible toll of deaths from the pandemic. 600,000 people have died over the last 15 months. That's more people than died during the American Civil War of the 1860s. You can see that the countries that are at the top of the list here are all democracies, while at the same time, China, an authoritarian regime, has suffered a much lower number of deaths. And this forces us to come back to Amartya Sen's observation about the effectiveness of democracies in preventing disasters like famines. And I think we have to ask squarely, what can we do to improve our systems of government so that they are doing a better job at managing challenges like economic growth and pandemics and similar disasters? What can we do to renovate our government so that they are effective in meeting these challenges without sacrificing our fundamental commitment to democracy and human rights? And I think that is going to be an immense challenge for people who study public policy over the coming decades. So let me just conclude. Essentially, the task for students of public policy is building a world in which people can live in physical safety, where they don't worry about being attacked or assaulted, in which people have access to the things they need to live a good life, like a decent education, access to health care and other services. And we also want to build a society in which people are treated with respect and equality. And we want to finally build a society, as I've said, that honors democratic principles. That is, in which a society in which people are allowed to participate in the government of their country through free and fair elections. So sometimes when we think about public policy, we think we're involved in tiny little issues of resolving policy problem X or policy problem Y, but this really is the big story. Building a better world for everyday people. And that is why I'm so very excited about being engaged in this field. Thank you very much for the opportunity to tell you something about my work and the realm of public policy. Again, if you'd like more information, please do visit the website for my school or my own website. Again, the slides for today are available at my website, aroberts.us. I hope that the rest of the conference is a highly constructive conversation. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today.